everyone, we've got a butterfly picture this week. What I've done is I've not taken too much of all this background detail. I've taken this butterfly, I've moved it slightly to this side and concentrate on getting a really nice shape, and then I've done 1, 2, 3, 4 flowers, so I've drawn those in, and then I've masked out the tops of each of these flowers and the edge of the butterfly, but I'm not bothered about masking out the dark like antennae that there, or the legs or anything like that, just the shape of the butterfly itself. I've just masked that out, so let that dry. Colours wise, I have got intense blue with gamboge to make a green, gamboge on its own. I've got cobalt violet. Now most of you won't have that. You want to make a pinky purple with permanent rose and a touch of cobalt blue. That will do a similar job. Then you want a bright red. So bright red, so from cobalt violet this way, these are all neat colours. These two I've got a bit of water in, so they're ready for a wash. So the bright red, I've used cadmium red deep, then I've got sepia, and then I've got Payne's grey. Okay. So I'm going to come on a wash of the background to start with. Plenty of water. You can come over these flowers. I am going to try and come around the edge of the butterfly just to keep that dry. But the masking fluid does make that easier. It's a bit dark today, it's a gloomy day. So I'm hoping you're seeing all of this with this extra light. Okay, so I'm going to start with a little bit of the gamboge yellow. I'm trying to give it a feeling of this sort of grassy effect in the background, so I'm keeping them quite vertical but swaying it different ways. Give my brush a rinse, then I'm going to come into the green. It's going to be a nice sort of soft focus background, so you don't have to worry too much about what's happening where. You can come totally over these flowers, up to the edge of the butterfly. So I've got this quite puddly. I quite like the effect. The intense blue tends to shoot quite a lot, and that's quite nice in a loose background. Okay, so I'm coming into now the cobalt violet. I've wet my brush and I've put plenty of paint on the brush. Now what I want is some distant flowers. So I'm going to just drop them in. The trick is to not aim for a puddle, because then it won't go too far. So aim for a spot that looks a bit drier. Because it's thick, it should push the paint away. And you can have as many of these as you want. So it should push the background paint away, make it nice and thick. You can come back into them. You don't want it to be too even. Sometimes they can look a bit round. And you can have as many or as little of these as you want. Just keep thinking of your focal point being around this butterfly. So you want quiet areas in here, you don't want too much going on. So don't just randomly dot them everywhere. Think it through a little bit. Okay, I'm then going to swap down. It's a bit of an experiment now. I've got some acrylic ink. If you haven't got acrylic ink, if you've got a bit of gouache, that would work as well. What I want is something a bit thicker that's going to stay put. So I've got my line writer or rigger. And this is a white iridescence, but it honestly doesn't matter. You could use a bit of white gouache. And what I'm thinking is I would quite like to have these like sort of cow parsley effects in the background. So I'm going to come in, and what I'm hoping is this is enough to give it a soft effect. So it's going to push it out. Hopefully you can see this. Because the paint's wet, it's pushing against it, and it's just going to give a soft effect of the cow parsley. I'm going to do a couple of these. Do one over here. It doesn't have to be too pronounced. You can always work into it later. It's just giving a bit of an effect there. Just make sure it doesn't look too even. Again, everything needs to look uneven and something that's this loose. Just going to run through a couple of lines as well for possible branches. There's one here. Okay. Make sure you give that a good rinse off, especially if you're using acrylic ink, because it does have a tendency to dry and stick. I've splattered it on my brushes. Give that one a quick rinse. Okay, and then I also want to take a tiny bit of sepia in. So again, the sepia is neat. And I want this sort of soft effect. So this is where you can get these darker stems. I'm going to come round this side. So you can have a combination of dark and light working really well together. Try not to overthink it. If you overthink it, you won't have enough time to get these in. So we're thinking nice and loose. And take a little bit of shadow. This is like just giving it shadow really onto this one. I'd be careful about putting any sort of teasels in the background with the dark. Could be quite hazardous if it explodes at this stage. I'm going to come in now with a number 6 just into my green, and then just underneath each of these I'm just going to start to indicate that bottom bit of the flower. So it's done its thing, it's settled, it's still wet, but there's enough wetness still to give this nice sort of soft focus flower. So you're just dotting a little bit of the green. And then I'm going to bring some stems in as well, and an indication of any leaves. So because these are soft focus, it doesn't really matter what you get in, as long as you've got something there. You won't be drawn to these unless they're really hard. So you need to make sure you're popping this on when it's soft. Hence why it's good to have it nice and wet. So you need to make sure you've mixed up plenty of green. You can run a few stems as well. Especially if you've finished your cow parsley at a point that's in the middle of the picture, you want to run some stems off and around really. And this stem here. So I'm just popping in a few random stems, bringing it over this area. That's good. I'm going to dry that one off now. Okay, so that's dried off now nicely, and what I'm doing now is I'm coming in and I'm creating a few stems that are in the foreground. Now I don't want you to do too many of these, but it is important to give that sense of distance. Now in the photograph there's this one that's coming across here that's just a brown stem. I'm going to make that a green stem, so I'm going to come across, and this is just with the green and my number 6, and I'm going to bring that across like that. And then this is all about brush control. So if you look at the shape of the leaves, you start very lightly, you push down, and then as you come towards the stem you lift up. That creates a lovely leaf shape without you having to do too much effort at all. What I would say is stagger them so that you don't end up with a connection both sides. Like you don't want one there because it'll look false again. You need it to be non-uniform all the time. So I'm going to bring another one out here. You can twizzle a little bit, you can bend, lift the pressure. If you've lost the tip bit, come back to it. Just makes a lovely leaf shape without any effort. There we go. Press down, lift. I want you to pay attention to where the cow parsley finishes and make sure there's something happening there. So it can't just finish mid-air. So it's either got to have something overlapping it, blocking that. So can I put, say, something here? Or you've got to continue the cow parsley so it finishes somewhere. I'm going to bring a leaf here. We need to sort of fade it a little bit into the background. So if I bring a leaf this way and then bring a stem, that could be part of the cow parsley then. And then I want something this way as well. So you've got some artistic license today. Okay, so now I'm going to come on to the flowers at the front here. So I'm going to create this shape. So I'm going on to dry with just the green. This will be when you find out if your masking fluids really worked or not. I used a knitting needle to pop mine on nice and thin. And you've got that same pressure, so I'm still using my number 6. Create that. Use plenty of green, gives you plenty of time. So I'll do one at a time. With my line writer or rigger, I can come in, let's have a quick look at the photograph, just pull this some little spiky bits out. So because this is nice and wet, I've got plenty of time to do this. Then I'm coming into some sepia. I'm still using that same line mitre brush. And now I'm curving this around. I'm sort of going in a crisscross pattern, so there will still be some bits of green showing, but the sepia's working there as well. So I'll do one more. You see that again? Go for this one on this side. So in with the green number 6. Vary the pressure of the brush to create that nice leaf. Then pull out some spiky bits. Then into some sepia. come across in a curved way, and then that way as well, so you're getting a few little bits of light on the sepia. Okay, I'm going to do the other two. I'll pause the camera and let them dry off. Okay, so you've got a small window of opportunity to add a few more leaves if you want to, and stems. I've added a few at the bottom here, and a couple of extra stems going up there, just to give the picture a little bit more depth. I've then dried it off and taken the masking fluid off. What we're going to do now is work on the rest, finishing off these flowers. So make sure you've got a nice clean brush, and you're going into whatever purple colour you've got. And you're just going to pop that on as a base. Take a bit of time to do this. Once it's dry, you can work back into it, but you want to try and keep those lines nice and fine, especially at the edges. If you've taken your masking fluid off and think you need a few more lines and it's not fine enough, then you can add a few more as you're doing this, because the background colour isn't too dark. It will just give an indication, a little bit more like shadowed ones. So you're just going to work your way around and get a base colour on each of these, just being careful. So I'm using my number 6. If you've got an odd little bit of white showing, it will work really nicely, so you don't need to worry about capturing every single bit of white. And then we're going to dry these off and go over with a second layer, just to give a little bit more definition. Okay, so I'll carry on doing that. Okay, so I finished that base layer, dried it off, and then I've come back in with a slightly thicker mix, and I'm just giving a little bit of definition. So this is that same colour, just a little bit thicker, and just breaking up this section. So you just want to pick out a few dark bits. Don't go mad. So you still want that difference between light and dark. On this one there's a lot of shadow this side, so I've kept it quite thick that side. Okay, so I'm going to dry that off now and we'll go on to the butterfly. So the first bit that we're going to do is the underside of the butterfly. And this is with sepia. And what I want you to really focus on is getting a nice sharp edge on this wing. So I'm using a number 6, but use whichever you're comfortable with. So all this underside is dark. However you've done the shape for your masking fluid is going to be basically the shape of the bottom of the butterfly anyway. If you pop into some Payne's grey, you can just drop that in and it will be darker towards the wing. So I'm dropping that in towards the wing. That makes that nice and dark. Then I want you to pick up a line writer or rigger. I've got a little bit of sepia on this. You don't need to go mad because you can pull some of the colour anyway. And I'm going to pop the legs in first, so they're going to come down. Into this flower. Then you need a very steady hand. You're going to pop these antennae on. Just checking where I've got this coming. So this should be a bit higher up. Once you've put those antennae on, there's no going back. So make sure you've got this shape right. You can come into this anyway. So as thin as you can possibly do them. I'm resting on the edge of my hand. Then you've got a little bit at the top. Then there's one coming out here. If you get a clean brush with a little bit of water on, you can indicate a little bit of softness. So I'm just touching in to the paint just a little bit and popping water further, so you get that hint of fuzziness in places. You don't have to do this, you don't have to do a lot of it. Just have a little go. Just that little bit makes all the difference. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so I'm going to use my number 6 now. And I'm coming onto the wings. I am missing the areas of white. It'll become apparent in a minute. Just so you're getting that little bit of white. Showing. I think I've got several areas there. So I'm going to come in first of all with the red. Now I want the red to be nice and thick. If you don't get any of the areas of white, I don't want you to worry too much. It's not the end of the world, you can paint them in after. Even if you just got a couple, that's enough really. Those big ones are the ones we definitely need to keep. You can get a bit bogged down in the detail and you actually don't need that much detail on something like this. So take the red further than it needs to go. You can take it where you've got the brown. And then you know where you're going. You use that as your base. Where you know it is going to be really red, keep it nice and strong. Like that. I'm going to come into some sepia now. Just start to pop the brown in. Do not get bogged down too much with the detail. Keep it nice and loose. Move fairly quickly. your brush another rinse. I've got a tiny bit of intense blue here. I'm just going to pick out a little bit of blue. Just in the places I can see. I don't want you to worry too much about inside each of these sort of peacock eyes yet. Just concentrate on the base, pulling that out. It's just hints of blue in places, so we're just getting those in. Where it's a bit lighter, with a damp brush, so it's not wet, I'm just going to lift out a few little bits. So damp brush, not wet, and that will just lift a few bits out. If you follow the direction of the wing, that will help. You could do this all dry and it would still work, but it's quite nice to have this little bit of softness happening. So now I've got a little bit of Payne's grey, and I'm coming in to the areas with the Payne's grey. Pop a little bit in there, just a little bit there. Touch the tips of the wing here in places. You can always sharpen it up later. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off and then come in for the last final bits. Okay, so we're very nearly there now. I'm going to pick up a tiny bit of intense blue on a loaded brush, so you've got this lighter blue appearing. So this is loaded with water. That's appearing there. I can put a little bit there to appear on that bit there. And then I want a bit of red. Remember, you don't want this to be too circular because you're looking at it from the side. It could be a mistake to make it too circular. So I've done that, I've rinsed my brush. I'm going to pop a little bit of Payne's grey in the centre, or the top bit here. It's all about paint control when you're doing something like this. And then I've got a damp brush, so it's not soaking wet, and I'm just going to touch the edge just so it starts to soften. It's a bit harder to do this with a camera because the tripod, I'd normally come to touch the paint and not, so I'd normally twist it round. So the bottom's dead easy for me to do, the top's harder, but I want to give you that soft effect. I'm going to quickly dry that off. Drying it off just stops it moving. This one at the bottom is still slightly damp, and it's because I want that to be still slightly damp to put this grey in. If you find you've dried it when I've just done that section because I said dry it off, it's fine, just wet it a little bit and come back in. You just want to make sure that this has got that same nice soft effect. If you're worried about it moving too much, then it's just a case of just grabbing the hairdryer and drying it off really quickly, and it will stop it going too far. And again, I need that softness around the edge. So I'm just going to use a damp brush just to touch the paint and then wet a little bit further so I get that nice softness happening. There's a little bit of sepia needs to come in just here now, just on that edge, to just give this a bit of a softness as well. So I've just sort of outlined that with sepia, and then I'm just bringing in a little bit more water just to make sure that that moves, so I'm getting that nice effect. Picking up a little bit of the red, and what I'm going to do is just come over and paint in a few lines of detail just on the wing. Okay, so I've just popped in those couple of extra bits of red here just to give a bit of extra definition, and that's pretty much it. And so I hope you've enjoyed this week's, and I'll see you next week. Bye!